Welcome back to All the Shit, a podcast that continues the conversation that started with the book, All the Shit I Wish I Knew in High School. If you haven't read the book yet, it is now available as an audiobook, which you can stream for free at thathighschoolbook.com. Please share it with your friends and anyone who works with young adults. I hope it can be a valuable resource in helping you make sense of the transition from childhood to adulthood, as well as give some perspective to the situations and challenges you're currently facing on this journey. If nothing else, I hope it's a reminder that you are not alone. While the primary goal of this podcast is to address questions from young adults about the shit they face in everyday life and dive into some of the specifics that are covered more broadly in the book, I think it's important for all of us to take a step back from time to time and remember that the world is bigger than any of us and our problems. It's easy, and it's human, to get myopic and focus exclusively on yourself. Generally speaking, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You do have to take care of yourself, and love yourself first, before you can truly love and care for others. However, I often find myself worrying about how siloed and isolated we've become. More and more of our communication is being done digitally. We text instead of talk. We share experiences in pictures and comments, rather than around the table over a beer or coffee. We have outsourced the human connection from the bulk of our interpersonal interactions. Most worrisome of all, we have the ability to cultivate our silos, allowing us to only hear what we want to hear and see only what we want to see. I believe this is a major contributing factor to the cesspool that quote-unquote civil discourse has devolved into. In fabricating our own personal safe space and focusing primarily on our own comfort by reinforcing our currently held beliefs, we lose sight of our fellow man, and we risk losing sight of humanity itself. I hope today's conversation will open your eyes a little bit. It certainly opened mine. I sat down with my friend Elvir, who has filled in as a co-host on a previous episode of this podcast, and is one of my favorite people to talk to, because he offers a perspective that challenges and expands my worldview. Elvir was born in Bosnia and came to the United States as a refugee in the early 90s. We recorded this conversation back in September of 2023. The war in Ukraine was already in full swing, but the war between Israel and Gaza was still a month away. At the time, I knew it was a conversation worth sharing, but I wasn't sure how best to frame the content. I've decided to share it now because it feels like we're approaching a tipping point in the United States. We are committing money and weapons to two international conflicts, creating internal conflicts here at home as a result. We are also entering a presidential election year, and I don't know about you, but I see dark clouds on the horizon, regardless of which party or candidate you support. Through all of this, it feels like we have lost sight of humanity writ large. We see people who disagree with us politically or religiously as enemies, even within our own country. This episode is not a political statement, so please don't misinterpret the intent. I aim to keep this platform agnostic, both politically and religiously. With that said, however, Elvir's story has lessons for all of us. Our conversation was long, so I've decided to break it into 2 episodes. Today's episode recounts Elvir's refugee story of escaping a war zone, which includes a brief political history of the Slavic states and the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia. Next week's episode will focus on his immigration story and assimilation into U.S. culture and society. The episode jumps right into a conversation about tribalism, iPhone people versus Android people, Jeep culture, and others. Elvir boils it down, I believe correctly, to our need for connection and the desire to be part of something bigger than ourselves, part of the group. As you'll hear, this tribalism can morph into nationalism, breaking people apart and leading to war. The most impactful part of this conversation for me was listening to him talk about how naive, his words, his family was as the war was getting started. The idea that, oh, that's happening over there. It can't happen here. I know I've been guilty of this mindset many times, and I'm sure it's been true for you at some point in time as well. I was stunned by how quickly the wind changed, and within a matter of weeks, his family went from denial to living in fear of their neighbors and a frantic effort to escape. It's kind of like a tidal wave. If you ever watched that video of the tidal wave hitting Japan, it seems like it's happening almost in slow motion, but it just keeps coming, destroying everything in its path. As you listen, I challenge you to put yourself in Elvir's shoes, or those of his parents. There were several moments in this conversation where I found myself thinking, wow, I can see some scary parallels to the political climate in the US today. I'm not saying I expect a war to break out here, but I think if you're honest with yourself, you can acknowledge that the powder keg exists, and we're one idiot with a match away from a crisis. I hope this story helps reframe your perspective on the wars we're currently watching from afar. It's not just about the countries and governments involved. It's not even necessarily about the ideology. It's about the civilians who bear the brunt of the destruction. Regardless of which side you support in either conflict, if any, I hope Elvir's story gives you some perspective on what it's like to be helplessly caught in the middle of a conflict that you cannot influence and want no part of. I hope it gives you some empathy and compassion for the people on all sides who are struggling and suffering with this reality in their lives. Most of all, I hope it inspires you to start building bridges and finding commonalities with your neighbors, people in your community, and yes, even in the hellscape that is social media. Put your pitchfork down. Put your phone down. Sit down. Break bread and have a real conversation with someone who thinks differently than you do. We can disagree with one another without being enemies. We have more in common than we think, and the only way to weather the looming storm is to start talking to one another and seeing one another as people again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Elvir. Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there? Welcome to All the Shit with Tom and Will. Are you an iPhone guy?
I am an iPhone guy. I'm an iPhone guy not by own decision. It was decision by my lovely wife. I had an Android, just like you, and we got to a point where my wife was saying, oh, I don't think you're getting my messages. And she thought because we don't have an iPhone, that's the problem. She's like, you need to get an iPhone. So about 2 years ago, my Android breaks. The antenna breaks. I go into T-Mobile, go ahead and fix it if you can. I said, we can't fix it. You need to get a new phone. Split up my choices. And obviously, my wife is like in the back of my head, get that iPhone. And I did. And I came back to the iPhone. I had Android for a long time. So anyway, here we are. I just jumped up on this train again.
How are you feeling about that decision?
Really, to me, phone is a phone. But in all honesty, as soon as I got it, it's like, oh, I feel great. I'm part of the group. I'm part of the social circle now. It's so funny when you're around people that have one or the other. They're like, oh, you're an iPhone guy or you're an Android guy.
Yeah.
And so they're all constantly getting you to a point where it's like, am I wrong by being an Android person? I'm not in the circle. Am I outside of the circle now? What does that mean for me? I want to be part of the circle. It's like all this internal conversation is happening. It's like, I just want to belong. I just want to be part of the group. So all of a sudden, the environment is pushing you to get that thing, whatever that thing is, that shoes, the car, the blah, 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 the phone. Doesn't matter what it is. It's
just to fit in, right?
Just to fit in. It's the constant fitting into the thing. And it's never, you're constantly plugging yourself into a thing instead of that thing being plugged into your own set of values or your set of morals or your own path. You're plugging yourself into stuff instead of stuff being plugged into your own path.
What's interesting about that? Two things. First, this morning I was reading an article because Google's releasing the Pixel 8. And they were talking about how Android has a big problem image-wise in the United States. And it's exactly what you're talking about because It's the tribalism between Android or iPhone. And something like 87% of the American market is iPhone, but 83% of the global market is Android. So it's a very uniquely American thing. So that's one side of it. Two, what you're talking about, that tribalism, I think that's part of innately being human. And the difference is before all this technology and all the things that we dress ourselves in to belong wherever we want, you were born into your group. Yep. That was it. That's who you were. You were stuck there. And that was your tribe. And now you get to look around and see, I want to be in that tribe, so I'm going to buy that vehicle. And I want to be in this tribe, so I want to buy that phone. And now I want to overlap into this tribe. So you build your own tribe based on the material things you acquire, which is what you're talking about. That's so crazy to think about, but that's exactly what's happening.
I think you're pointing out something that is definitely evident in our society. Just driving down a road, I remember a buddy of mine who has a Jeep Wrangler. And he's, hey, there's a Jeep thing. And I'm like, Jeep thing? What are you talking about? And so it's like, watch this. So we were just driving down a road in his Jeep, and people are just waving to each other. People in other Jeeps say hi to people in other Jeeps as they're going down the road. And I'm like, this is just strange. And then obviously there's these groups of people who own Jeeps are constantly meeting together and developing communities around that thing that they own, an object, an inanimate object. To me, it really comes down to what are our similarities? What do we congregate around? What kind of things we enjoy doing? We congregate around that thing. So it's not really an inanimate object. It's our need for connection. So that's all we need. So we're using a phone, we're using a car, we're using, love for hiking. There's just hiking communities. So let's get out there and just love on nature and let nature love us. So we're connecting with the environment, but we're connecting with each other. That's the purpose of it.
Yes.
So I think that's what we want. We just constantly want connection, and we're finding ways to connect in this sort of very disconnected world. That's the interpretation of what I'm seeing.
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah.
Right on the head, man.
Yeah. Going back to tribalism, being from a different part of the world, people ask me this question: how does it feel to go from one part of the world into another and then find a home there? Well, you'll be surprised, because people over there want a connection. People over here want a connection. You can find your own community here. It's really not that difficult if you just open up to wanting to have a connection. There's so many people who simply can't, or put a wall between themselves and the community that they just came into. It's simply around shared values and language. I don't mean language in terms of, I'm just speaking English here, but language around how do we define things and how do we connect to those things. So if me and you, two different parts of the world, are connected to the nature, and we love backpacking, love hiking, love just being out in the woods for a couple of days, just an example, that's a shared language. Everything else is just little fillers that come into, like, okay, there's some differences, there's some similarities, but there's a huge connection. And that connection is with what's happening outside of these walls.
In that world, we speak the same language.
Same language.
Yeah, man.
I think that's what creates a lot of tensions and conflicts and creates a lot of tribalism, because or people tend to just connect on certain things, but don't tend to connect on other things, because that's who we are. I'm not a car guy. People.
Yeah, I always feel left out when those conversations kick off.
Oh my God. Yeah, this 1969 Chevy and blah, 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 and this many horsepower and everything. It's like, yeah, I get it. I get the conversation. But all of a sudden, they connect with this other person who loves old school muscle cars. And it's like, my dad had one. And then my grandpa had all these other things. So there's this very similar things. I feel left out. But there's just one part of the equation. That's like a one little thing. We're much more than that. You'll be surprised if you just stay patient and talk to people and just open up. There's so many ways to connect. It's just people don't tend to go beyond a certain. The thing is, if we are going back to just being guys, being men, we're always going to connect on that part. We're going to connect on just being a male in society. And then it goes into like the onion. We're just peeling the layers. And once you start peeling the layers, yes, of course, there's disconnect, and there's much more connects than there are disconnects. But we're talking about relationship we have with our fathers, relationship we have with our, with our girlfriends or boyfriends. Doesn't matter what it is. There are so many things that make us similar. This is why I'm so puzzled why there's so many conflicts and separations between people, even with the shared language. Religion separates. Religion almost intentionally separates. Not the intent of religion itself, but the people that interpret that word. I come from a background where the separation and differences between people are, say,
trivial.
Yeah. We bring us to a point where you close yourself in and you just don't open yourself up to other experiences and don't take the risk to learn from others. And so we get to a point where it's like, oh, it's just different. And you just quit there. Oh, that's different. So I'm not going to go exploring other conversations or other opinions. We can always talk about the political thing. Like, I disagree on the abortion thing, or I agree on that. Or I'm pro-choice, pro-life, and you stop there. Some people just, I don't agree, X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to stop the conversation there. I'm not going to explore other venues on connecting. It's like, God, really? And you'll be shocked how many things are so common with this neighbor that lives down the road than just that opinion that is nationwide. You may not have common things on what kind of potatoes you like. I like sweet potatoes, or I just like russet, whatever. But in terms of general things like certain values and commonalities around where you live, they're there. That's why I stopped thinking. I'm thinking globally, but I'm much more turned to local. You heard of expressions like act locally, think globally, or something like that, or think globally, act locally. Locally is where you can have more control, you have more connections. Global is just a result of your local efforts. I don't even think what's happening on the other side of the world that much as I used to, rather than what's happening with my own neighborhood.
Right. Well, it's where do you have the most opportunity to influence the change you want to see? It's not globally.
It's never, yeah. It's just, that's the result. That's the end result. If you can have an impact in your own neighborhood, that's a ripple effect. If you want to break into building connections with people, people have to find the thing that makes us much closer and makes us have more divisions. And people are not willing to tear down certain walls that they built themselves in order to make those connections.
I think you've seen a lot more than most people listening to this, having been through a much different, I mean, we all have different life experience, right? That's the beauty of life, is no one's life is the same. We find overlapping parallels. But you have a unique story that I don't know anyone else who has been quite where you've been. And I think that helps you paint the way you see the world in a unique way that most Americans would not ever be able to see it. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood, coming up, and how you made your way to the United States?
All right, so we have to go back to give you a context of where I came from and what got me to this country. I was born in 1981 in a country that was former Yugoslavia, so a country that until 1990 was communist. The government was communist. The whole economy was based on internal means of production. So that's just the political structure. The societal structure was based off of that. And I guess you would say that the type of societal structure needed to exist in order to keep us from really getting at each other. I was born in Bosnia, so Bosnia itself had three religions, three ethnicities, if you will. So I had Muslims, Catholics, and Orthodox Christians living together. And from 1945 until 1990, the country itself was under a communist rule, forcing religion into like a third tier. So it wasn't as important as the main goal to sort of us to live together. We had a shared language and to build a society that makes us strong. So we had one country, now it's 6, but we had one country at close to 22 million people. And what they were plugging into our brains was brotherhood and unity.
So prior to 1945, World War II ends and there's a restructuring of Europe and the East. Yeah. What was the makeup of that area then? Was it still the same sects of Christianity, Islam?
So everything was there. The way things are, they have been like that since roughly 1700s, maybe even 1600s. So the Ottoman Empire came in. Yeah, I got to go back.
Yeah, here I am asking you. If you asked me the same questions on American history, I'd be struggling to pull the same data.
It's very hard. So the Ottoman Empire started to go into that area in 1500s, 1600s, and taking over, just basically ruling that area. Bosnia was under Ottoman Empire.
And the Ottoman was the Turks, right?
The Turkish, yeah. And so they brought in the religion. They brought in the culture, religion, part of the language as well. And that's why you have Islam represented in that part of the world. Even the capital of Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia, is called like a mini Jerusalem because it represents all religions. Has Jews, has Muslims, has Catholics and Orthodox Christians right there in that little city, in the whole country, but in that particularly in that little city. So when the Ottomans left in 1800s, the whole region became a kingdom. We had a king. That king was Serbian. So he ruled Serbs, Croatians, and Bosnians under one country, Yugoslavia, which wasn't complete as it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, but it looked similar. And under his rule, things were going, I guess, okay. People still didn't like each other too much just based on religion and all the other stuff that carried with it. But in World War I, which, by the way, did start in Bosnia, we like to start stuff.
Ferdinand.
Yeah, it started in the capital. The country itself was part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. So if you were an Austro-Hungarian army during the World War I, you have to have 8 different translators for the whole army because you had Croatians, had Hungarians, had Austrians, had probably like part of Romanians, and you had so many different countries in that little empire. So that whole thing fell apart in the 1930s when the king of Yugoslavia basically abdicated the throne when Hitler came on board and started to take over big parts of Europe. Poland and obviously Germany and Austria, but the king left, leaving a huge hole in that region of what's going to happen with it. What 40s did is left that hole, and President Tito at the time, with backing of Red Army and the Russian forces, took over through the communist rule. So he fought the king's former military. He fought Croatian Nazis. So Croatia was like a puppet state, Nazi puppet state. It's crazy because if you go over there now, you still see the little bit of that coming through, even through some of the conversations. Not as much, but in certain environments, it does come through. This certain level of nationalism, which with all of those countries. But Croatia brought that back in the civil war that we had there. Serbs brought back their own army that was there pre-40s. That's who President Tito and the Yugoslav army wasn't created then, but fought back those two factions. So it suppressed Croatian nationalism, suppressed Serbian nationalism, and make this whole country whole. He suppressed it with military rule. Put the boot on the neck, as we would say it, on those two countries. So now you're controlling that part of the country for 40 years, suppressing that nationalistic view. So the conversation in the 80s, when he died in the 1980s, oh crap. Now all that suppression started to bubble up in the 80s. You know, it's like, oh, we need to separate from this ruling. We're not cool. We're never cool. It's just this guy was suppressing all of us for years. That's the sort of sentiment that arrived. So anyway, 80s were great, actually. As a child, I had a great childhood.
So is that sentiment, when you say it's bubbling up, is it bubbling up as a united peoples, or is it bubbling up independently within the different sects and nationalities?
It was done independently. It was Croats, people from Croatia wanted to have their own thing. In Bosnia itself, there was sort of Muslim nationalism in a way, Bosnian nationalism that wanted to come through as well. It was always there, just not talked about, not read about. People ended up in jail if you wanted to separate and wanted to have your own thing. So it started bubbling up a lot more in the 80s because you didn't have that one guy who was controlling everything. And his party started losing power in the late 80s, obviously, when the Berlin Wall went down, the whole thing crumbled. It's funny, in the 80s, just the language. The shared language, talking about shared language. So let's just say me and you were kids during that time. You're 8, I'm 8. And let's just say we have a debate on something. I'm telling you something truthful. I'm swearing on. And you've been in this conversation. It's like Tom, that's not, I don't believe it. And it's like, man, I swear to God.
My dad could beat up your dad.
Yeah, that kind of a thing. It's like, I swear on, people use this language. So if I was to say in 1987, for example, and I was like, I'm 7, 8 years old, and I say something like, man, I swear on my mother, man, I scored this goal from 50 yards away. Nobody's going to believe you. But if you say, I swear on my president, you swear on the president. I'm like, true. Nobody will debate that. It's like you swore on God, on a Bible, if you will. Huh. He was such a prominent person that he was like the closest thing to God for some people.
This is Tito?
This is President Tito, yeah.
Okay.
Who's actually born in Croatia. So this was the relationship we had with growing up. We were united. I didn't know what religion my friends are. Hell, I didn't know what religion I was because it wasn't a thing. As soon as you make it a thing, you're separating. So I grew up with the value of saying you put religion into the mix, you're immediately separating. You're immediately...
Yeah, you're saying this is something that differentiates me.
Yeah, you're causing divisions, right? Because even that president, when he would be speaking to the crowds, he would say, let's not forget what we fought for. We fought to not have divisions. We fought for united Yugoslavia, which is no divisions. But at the same time, the language is called Serbo-Croatian, yet I'm Bosnian. There's people who are from Slovenia, people from Montenegro and Macedonia. And the language is called one thing. It's not called Yugoslavia. Like you call it English.
This isn't England.
But you call it English. But you think about it, it's like you call it English, but you don't debate on that. You don't say, this is my English.
Right. This is Anglo-American English.
Yeah, exactly. So we debated on the language. We debated on the smallest little things. Yet the culture is not that far from each other. And the whole time he was trying to create a unified country, yet it seems like to the root of it, it was never unified. He was just surface. So people call it a big experiment. Let's just see what happens for 35 plus years if we unify these people. And what happened is people intermarried. Nobody cared about religion. A lot of people didn't. They just intermarried. People have what you would call mixed marriages. What came out of that is kids who really haven't made religion an important thing. The values were around family. No more God. It's just like value. It's family. That's what my thing is now. Because that's all you got if you don't have the higher power. I grew up with majority of my family is from mixed marriages. So we never discussed religion, even though both my grandmothers were both Muslim. So we never went to them and said, oh, what you're doing doesn't make sense. No, that's how they grew up. They were born in the 30s, pre-communism. So their value system was religion is number one. And then my grandmother had to hide the fact that she had to so Muslims get circumcised. So she had to hide my uncle and my dad taking them to get him circumcised. That was something you had to hide in the 40s and 50s because it's a religious thing. It's a religious act.
So your grandmother was Muslim?
Yes.
And circumcision was encouraged in the Muslim faith?
That's right.
So even though she was Muslim,
a rule, yeah.
She decided not to have them?
No. She had them circumcised in secrecy.
Oh, because it was not commonly accepted by the
Communist Party, okay. Especially if your husband, my grandfather, is in the party. So he was in the Communist Party just by default because he fought in the war. And he was in that party until, I think, 1979. The value system changed for him. He said, this is not what I fought for. And he left it after, 30 years or so. And so anyway, it was a really tough time in between 1945 and about 1955 as you're rebuilding the country. So we lived in I would say, multi-ethnic environment. People went to church, people went to a mosque, they prayed and all these other things. They were just not part of the communist element. They were going to managerial positions, supervisory positions in their factories, because you couldn't go to a church and be in a communist party. Didn't work. Those are two opposite things. So you either pick one or the other, or none, really. People did that too. So it was, for example, it was difficult for my mom to secure a job because she wasn't in the Communist Party. People were really wanting for you to be part of the party. So those were the sort of 70s and 80s. There was pushback on the government a lot because the way it was limiting people, since the production was internal, sometimes you have scarcity. And what got us to a point where in the late 80s, Berlin Wall goes down. And a lot of people are on one part of the world are celebrating, while the other part of the world is saying, oh crap, what's going to happen now that your whole economic structure, political structure is going to dissipate. In the 90s, I remember the first thing that hit us was inflation. So at this age, so 1990, 1991, I'm 10 years old. I am first witnessing companies started to, because companies were, or organizations were government owned, and the government doesn't have any money, no means to pay its workers. Now they're protesting.
What was your personal feeling? What do you remember of when the wall came down? Was that an exciting time for you? What was the feeling in your family and your community around that event?
To us, and I can tell you, and this is what even my parents would say, we were very naive in that first year.
Did you have an idea of what you thought it would mean for you?
No. We were so secure, and especially as Bosnians, we were so secure that our unified way of life will keep us moving. It's just over there. It's not here. Even when the war in our part of the world, in Bosnia, in former Yugoslavia started, we were thinking like, oh, this is just going to blow over. We were so naive to it because for 30 plus 40 years, you're trained in a way to things like this is just some crazy people doing some wrong things and it's just going to blow over. It's like a skirmish. And when the wall came down in 89, I remember right around 1990, there was a protest in Kosovo. And people here heard of Kosovo because back in 99, they wanted their own country. And they got their own country. So in 1990, Kosovo, which is, I guess you would say back then a province of Serbia, had majority Albanians, different language. And the people who were controlling everything are Serbian. So they're running the political structure. They're in police. So these people from Kosovo, these Albanians are like standing up saying, I want to have my own thing now. And it's not okay to be pushed around. And police were just beating up on them. And then during that time, the president of Yugoslavia goes down there. It's like, nobody's going to touch you, nothing to fear, all these other things. And that was our first introduction of what this country can do to others if they try to rebel against it. I wasn't thinking about it too much because when I was a kid, I mean, I remember watching things on TV and even the movies. Like you would watch a movie here, like Saving Private Ryan. Great movie. You know, you're watching it from a perspective of an American, right? And American forces. And you're cheering for them and you want them to survive. You're watching the glory. You're watching the sacrifice. You're watching, probably saying with the pride is like, I can't imagine what people went through and how proud you are of those men and women who gave their lives to free others, to create a more equal society. Now, we did the same thing as a kid. Yeah, I watched a lot of war movies. That's the fundamental thing that was so equal to all of us. We were watching a lot of war movies because that's when the revolution happened for us. So yeah, you're watching partisan army, which is, you know, communists fighting back or fighting against the invasion, against the Nazis, against Serbian, we will call it traitors, and Croatian fascists and all that. And they're waving these flags, and the flags they're constantly being waved are our Yugoslav flag. If you look it up, you can look it up on the internet, was red, white, and blue, 3 stripes with right in the middle of it is a huge red star. When I was born, my mom, when you have a son, you're like, the pride of having a son to be part of the Tito's army. It was just huge. I would draw a lot of military stuff. So I would draw tanks and everything and people and blah, blah, blah. And I would draw flags. It's always the Yugoslav flag fighting Nazis or something like that. So all of a sudden, this army that you call it Yugoslav People's Army is now a threat. So I tell people when they are waving whatever flag you're waving it, your dad waved it. My dad was in the army. He had to serve 2 years. Every male had to do that. He was part of the Yugoslav army. My own grandfather fought to create the country. You know, very, very proud. All of a sudden, this thing is now fighting you, now going after you. And I tell people about being in the position of waving whatever flag you're waving, going back to tribalism. You shouldn't put so much emotion into it because it can mean something different for some other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it can turn against you as well, even if you almost worshipped it for 3 generations. So that's what happened in 92. The army itself was used to stop insurrections, to stop people wanting to have their own country after the fall of communism. So in May of 1992 is when that same army attacked Bosnia because it wanted to separate with the backing of nationalist Serbian forces. So you had nationalist forces who are just a bunch of people.
Like a private militia almost?
Private militia, yeah. Backed by an army that has airplanes and tanks and stuff like that. You can imagine this huge coalition that was, by the way, 4th in terms of armament in Europe at some point, is now attacking itself. And other people are fighting back for their lives, really. Ordinary citizens were fighting back because nobody prepared for this. And the experience, we got lucky because we left. We saw things happening in a neighboring Croatia, which is only 30 kilometers from where we lived. And we were like, okay, this is not good, but still, we shouldn't be too alarmed by it. And then it started to creep up on our border. We watched the news. There was a protest on the news. And that protest was like a peace protest. It was people marching for peace. And what happened there is somebody decided to shoot on that crowd. Nobody talks about where that shot came from, but it was a skirmish. And that's where it took off in Bosnia itself. I remember being on our balcony because we were living on the 4th floor of this building that got built in mid-'80s. And those apartments were given to people like my dad who didn't have a house or anything like that or place to live. And they were workers. They were working in a factory. So they were given these apartments. And we were living there for 5 or 6 years before the war started. And we were on this balcony and my mom pointing out to these hills. Just imagine right now we're looking outside. So if you see where those power lines are and you say, look, there's a house burning.
Yeah. We're estimating it. Yeah, it's probably a mile, 2 miles away.
And you can see it burning. It was at night. Now, what got to that, why that house is burning and even what shot it, it went over your head.
You were in the crossfire.
Yes. So whatever hit that, it hit while was going over your head. So it was a long distance shot. Military. This is not people using handguns to shoot each other. This is a military operation. 2 days after that, I'm playing outside. We were just playing soccer, just being kids. And you can hear thuds. And those thuds are when things are being hit somewhere far away. The sound is a little bit suppressed, but it has some distance to it. And my mom is like kind of calmly just calls you go inside the house. So these are a matter of weeks. Our neighbors started to get together, and discussion was about, since we live in a building, we don't have a basement, and you need to hide from...
Need a bomb shelter.
You need a bomb shelter, yeah. And so people decided to go into different basements and bomb shelters, if you will. And we didn't go with that. We decided to leave. Prior to that, the entrance to our apartments had a storage unit. Even buildings here, if you're living in a whatever apartment building, there's some storage units for tenants. And the storage unit was like storing, bicycles and whatever. And so they emptied all of that out and used that storage unit as I guess you would call it a guarding shack or station. And 2 men would be positioned at the entrance of our apartment building and rotating hours. But they didn't have much. They had a pistol and an AK. But here's the thing. If you're a male over age of 25, every single male is trained in military.
Because they've been conscripted for those 2 years.
Yeah, everybody had to serve. So my dad knew exactly how to operate these weapons, not that he wanted to. Everybody around him knew how to operate any weapon, really. And they were positioned there on rotating hours thinking that whoever comes in, they're checking them. Because here's why. Even our neighbors, other neighbors who were Serbs, started to militarize themselves. So you don't even know if your neighbor is going to come through that building, start firing, because that's their order. Your own neighbor that you knew for years can come and kill you, which is what happened later, meaning your own neighbor told these military forces where to go and find you and your family, where you're hiding, because they'd known you for 20, 30 years or something like that. That was a tense time. Not long after, my mom, my brother, and I got together with my grandmother and a couple other people. It was some other family, I think some of my cousins, and we left. It was the end of May. We left Bosnia through way of Croatia by crossing the border. And that was kind of interesting to see. I remember there were 3 cars. The first car, when we got piled into us, now as a child, you're thinking you're going on vacation. Because what our parents did really well is not freak us out. It was more like calmly get your bags. And we just packed up. We got 2 bags, 3 maybe.
You assumed you would be coming back.
Oh, certainly. Without a doubt, you're going to be coming back. That's in 1992 and you never came back. But we just got our stuff. And thankfully, my uncles, so my aunt for my mom's side, so really my mom's sister-in-law, her father owned a company. Now, you could own businesses during the communist times. You could definitely own a business. You just couldn't employ a lot of people. Small business, right? As soon as you employ past, I think, 10 people, you're automatically part of you're part of the government.
Right in.
Yeah, they suck you right in. So I think he had a small little, maybe 5 people employed. But he did have a truck. That truck was truck that carries water and drinks and whatever. So he stored a bunch of his own supplies, which is like teas and juices and milk and all kinds of stuff. There's little packages of it. So that's what he had in the back of it. We were in the front of that car. And then the other 2 cars were like 2 little Golfs or whatever. My grandmother was in one of them. And we took off. We went to take the train or a bus, I can't remember, in 30 kilometers, which is about 20 miles, 25 miles, something like that, off the border of Croatia. Now, the town that we were in is starting being surrounded by military forces. And I remember a couple of things that are sticking in my head as we were pulling out of this driveway where my grandmother lived. That big truck and 2 smaller cars were pulling out. And right on the intersection with this gas station, we're going to take a left and a guy is right on that intersection, pointing his weapon down to the road that we're going down. It's like pointing an AK and just kind of sitting in a crouching position. It's like, oh man. All right. So we're just going. There's not many people on the road. There's nobody on the road. It's really empty. Once things start flying, bombs and all that, not even birds are in the air. Nothing is out there. It's very quiet, eerie if you don't hear any shots. We make our way towards the hills, basically. We went a back way to get to the border through these like little villages. And so we get to a first checkpoint and we look at the people there and you don't know who they are, but they're carrying light weaponry. They're carrying shotguns. What are you going to do with the shotgun against a tank? Or, I didn't even tell you a story about military planes crossing over. Now, that's some scary stuff, man. That's just low flying airplanes. That's why I don't like airplanes now anymore. Like these military airplanes flying low because it's scary. because they can do some damage. And thankfully, that's all they did to us, is just scare the crap out of people.
Yeah, that was the purpose, just to fly by to
Just to
intimidate.
get you out. Yeah. You don't even see them because they come so close to the tree line. You just hear rumbling. And it's just like, just a loud sound that comes. I remember we had a recess. I think I was like 4th grade, right? Recess was occurring and we just went outside and played. We were back at the school, which currently no longer exists because it was bombed to pieces. So it was a elementary school and middle school in one place. And we were playing in the backyard, back part of it. And it was a nice clear day. It was spring. And you hear this rumbling. I was like, where's the,
Looking for thunderclouds?
Yeah, you're looking for like a thunder. And all of a sudden it's like this sort of like a howling sound. And then it's just like, you don't even see it because it's so low to the ground and it just knocks you down. So I remember all these kids just sort of like crouching down on the ground. Even me, you just went down because it was intentionally that low. And it was a MiG. I think it was a MiG-21 or something like that. So just low flying. You can see the details of the plane. That's how low it is. And so those are the tactics that were used to like breaking sound barriers and stuff like that. It's just breaking windows and not even striking anything. Right across from the elementary school, there was a river. And across that river is the military base that had a military position there if they wanted to use it, the barracks and all that stuff. So it made sense to fly over there just to protect those areas, just to get people out. So those are like little small tactics. And I remember 4th grade, my last class, I think we had 4 4th grade classes. And out of those 4 4th grade classes, they had 30, 35 kids. And only 10 of us showed up on the last day. And the teachers told us, stop showing up. Don't come to school anymore. We don't know when this is going to be done. We're like, all right, great. School is over. I mean, as kids, you're just so oblivious to it. You're so naive. Just like, school is over. We're just leaving. And passing these checkpoints, my aunt's uncle was using his business to get us through. He was just giving away stuff. And it was like juices and milk and whatever he had in the back of that truck to get us through these checkpoints. Because people are like, what do you got? You imagine not only if it's war, it's also you don't have stuff. The whole economy is down.
Yeah.
So now you're bartering old school system. It's like, I'll give you a piece of bread for this. It's just like you're bartering because money barely means anything. My dad, before everything started to break down, he started buying German marks, Deutschmarks, because our money didn't mean crap. That's the start of the war. So anyway, we passed our check marks. I remember the last check mark we passed, we're done. It was like 2 of them. And we only got fired on once, but that overshot us by far out, like to our right, because we were just flying through these little villages and stuff like that. They were just decimated. There's the outskirts, the counties of our town got decimated before they even got to the city. So we just went through and we got across the border, and everything else is sort of a blur. We got to Croatia, got to the capital of Croatia. That's where our sister was. Our half-sister. Stayed there for like 2 days in a little tiny apartment before we moved on to a little town called Pula, which is actually a big town, which we used to visit as kids all the time as vacation because it's right on the coast. And my aunt lived there since the 70s, and that's where we became refugees. Now you're no longer a citizen. You're not a citizen of Yugoslavia anymore because that country doesn't exist. Croatia at that time got its own sovereignty. So because it's got its own sovereignty, anybody that comes in is a foreigner, even though you speak the same language. So now I am a refugee in my own country, so to speak. Man. So we have to get a little ID that says you are a refugee. We live at my aunt for about 6 months until that little 1-bedroom apartment couldn't hold 13 people anymore.
So your aunt was a Croatian citizen, though?
Yes.
Is that what allowed you to stay?
Yeah, because we had a place to stay. She had an apartment there since like 79 or 80. So way before the war, like 10, 11 years before the war, she lived in Croatia. She married a Croatian man who was in the military at that point. So she left Bosnia, 79 when she had a kid, her first child. So that's when we went. We just one place to know where it didn't have war. It was far coast of Croatia. So we went, stayed there for 6 months, and there was a lot of us there. We filled up that little tiny apartment, like what I said, with 13 people. And the youngest one, he was born in 91. So he was just a little tiny little kid, a baby, basically. And so there was too many people. And we decided we were going to go to a refugee camp that was set up in the vicinity. We enrolled ourselves into a camp that had all sorts of people from Bosnia, from all over the country. So this is where we started to meet people who lived in parts of Bosnia that saw really bad atrocities because they were majority Muslim. You started to see what war can do to people because we didn't see. This is why I'm so thankful as an adult, because I didn't see so much killing. That when I heard these stories, even now when I read about it, it was like, wow, people actually witnessed this. And some of them are normal, quote unquote, walking around still having families and jobs and all these other things. We didn't see any of that. We experienced different type of trauma, but they experienced another level, especially where majority of them didn't have family members because they were gone, they were killed. And so now we're in a camp interacting with these people and finding out how things were in different parts of the country. And that was an interesting experience. And, during that time, you never really reflect on it. You never really everybody's in the same boat. So you're not really like, is this right? It's like, it is what it is kind of a thing. You're just going through the process. So the adults had a different reflection on it than kids were just like, I just want to be a kid, man. Yeah, I think you reflect on it a little more when you're in your parents' shoes and you have to make certain risks or sacrifices. And my parents don't even talk about it anymore. Like it never happened. I was like, maybe we should talk about it. So,
Dang. You talk about trying to reflect on something. It's hard to reflect on anything in the present moment. I think the closest I can come to that, and it's not even close to the same, but being here for September 11th, which of course you were here for that as well.
Yeah.
But the same situation, the surrealism is hard to overcome, and you just kind of are existing and trying to figure out, all right, what is happening? What's next? And it takes, you're years removed from the actual event before you can actually reflect on it and look at it and take it in from a 20,000 foot view.
Right.
Because in that moment, you're just moment to moment.
Well, it's survival, depending on what kind of environment you're in. When you're in a survival mode, if you're in that zone, you're in the zone of there's no time for reflection. There's no time of, is this right? Am I doing the right thing? It's like, how am I feeling throughout this whole thing? You're not even acknowledging emotions during that time. Survival is just like, what can I get at that moment? You're moment by moment. You don't know if tomorrow's going to show up kind of thing. So you don't have time to reflect on things. You're not that comfortable yet. So now you can reflect on it. Now I can sit down and read about stuff. Now I can see a therapist. Now I can think about why my parents made certain decisions or decide if I do want to go in depth a little more about my own emotion during that time or how I felt. Or I remember having a lot of stomach aches when I was a kid. I was like, what the hell? They're always wondering, why do I have so many stomach aches? And is it the food? Because not a lot of people around me, a lot of kids did have that. Some did maybe, but was it the stress of the whole situation? Nobody talked about that until you had the time to reflect on that experience and like, oh, I just made that connection. Because that's something you never even thought about. It was like, oh, stomachache. Let's give them something for it and move on. What's the next thing? So yeah, that was it.
So how did you guys ultimately get out of the refugee camp?
By coming here. We actually changed 2 camps. We had one camp that first camp that was created. It wasn't adequate enough to house that many people. We didn't have heating. We didn't have anything there. And we moved to another one, which was much better. By the way, these are all former military buildings that were evacuated because that military is no longer there. It's been kicked out. We got here by, we applied. There was a way to apply to leave the country, to go be a refugee somewhere else, I guess. And we had 2 options to either go to Australia or we're here. And everybody thought Australia was too far. And I was like, is it now? No, but the choice was to come here and took about a year and a half to go through the process.
And you guys were living in the camp for that year and a half?
So we were in a camp since we came here in 1995. We were in 2 separate camps since summer of 92. So 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I remember my 11th birthday being in a camp. My cousin, because we were living on the coast of Croatia in a camp, we were still trying to make it like people still try to be normal about the situation.
Yeah, you have to try and keep something alive.
Yeah. So I remember my cousins who were there, from Croatia, who were living there, bought me a pair of, what do you call those? Swimming shoes, like those with like a duck shoe.
Like the fins?
The fins. Yeah, it bought me fins because, you can go to the beach and you can use the fins to swim or dive or whatever. And I remember being bought a pair of fins. So that was like a neat thing. Yeah. So I remember getting that at age 11, which is funny. Like we typically never get anything to each other, but they were like, this would make them happy. And I was the oldest boy out of that whole group. So maybe that was like they wanted to do something for the old guy, for an 11-year-old. But everybody else was younger than me, except I have one older cousin. She's 2 years older than me. So I think it could have been her idea. because I was constantly wanting to borrow hers and just.
So did you have goggles too?
No goggles, just a fins.
So what are the beaches like?
They're very clear. It's sort of Mediterranean kind of a feel to it. Croatia faced Adriatic Sea, which is, if you ever look at the map of Europe, you'll see the boot of Italy. And then on the back side of that boot is Adriatic Sea, and then it borders Croatia, the Croatian coast. And Pula, which is North Croatia, that part, if you drive 2 hours north of Pula, which is, a decent drive now, you'll hit Italy. You hit Slovenia, then Italy. So it's not far from Italy itself, but it is a very well-known tourist area. A lot of Roman structure still exists in the area. So it's a great tourist area. So it's kind of funny because we were a bunch of refugee kids around, still going to the beach, still leaving the camp, going to the beach, coming back, while there's a bunch of tourists on the beaches at the same time.
Wow.
It was kind of funny because tourists, from Germany, from Poland, from Italy, from whatever, they come and enjoy their time.
Yeah, even though there's a war going on,
there's a war
30 kilometers away
in that country, still happening, but on a different part of it. Yeah, it was kind of strange, but to me, it wasn't too strange because we used to vacation there since my first birthday was celebrated in Pula. And so every year we would go to that part of Croatia. So to me, it was kind of weird. It was kind of like a refugee/tourist.
I'm thinking about myself at that age, trying to put myself in your shoes. And, getting fins would have been so cool because now you can dive, you can go look at stuff. Yeah. How much of that, like in your mind, what were you feeling? Do you remember?
A feeling?
Was it, oh, this is cool. I got this beautiful beach, but we're also living in this camp and I don't know when I'm going home. The closest parallel I can have in my mind is being from a military family. Every time we'd move, we wouldn't have a house for a while.
Okay.
When we moved to Virginia, I was probably about your age. It was early, mid-90s, I think 95, 96.
Okay.
When we came to Virginia. 94, 95, 96, somewhere in there. And we drove from Arizona, where my dad was stationed, out to Virginia. And it was a long road trip. That's what it felt like. We got here. We lived in base housing. It was me, my 3 brothers, my mom and dad living in a little 2-bedroom thing. One of us was sleeping on the couch. We would walk down to the pier where we could see the water. We could watch the jets taking off. But that was our life for a couple months until we got a house. And it felt like my life was in limbo a little bit because I didn't have a home, so to speak. But all of my family was there. All of the important things that made me feel safe were there. But it just felt almost not dreamlike, but it was a separate mini chapter in my life that was completely compartmentalized in that span of time. So I guess more broadly, not just about the beaches and the fins, I'm thinking about there were certain things like going crabbing was something that we did because we were close to the pier. We got these cheap little crab nets, tied some chicken necks in them, and that's what we did for fun. Because there was not much else to do. There was a little playground for the kids. There was kids from other families who were staying there in the transition. Some of them we got along with, some of them we didn't. And there was always a little bit of mixing it up on the playground, and then you get back with your family and you go crabbing. But it was all just that small segment of time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how we experienced everything. It was sort of like chapters. It was like, it's another chapter. So you don't dwell on the first one. You kind of talk about it, but it's like you're in another chapter. We need to be moving on. I think the main difference between what you just described to me and ours is just the circumstances of going from one place to another. That kind of defines how you go about each and every day. You probably have breakfast, lunch, dinner, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we did, yeah.
All right. So if you had breakfast, lunch, dinner, were you worried if you will have breakfast, lunch, dinner?
No, I'm sure that was a big difference.
We knew that there will be some food because now they're organized this camp, this refugee camp. It was not nutritious at all. You didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice what you're going to eat. You're just lucky you can eat something. Every day you're in a line waiting for that food to be given to you. You would eat it and go about your day, So you didn't eat highly nutritious food. You just ate food that was brought in from somewhere. My parents, they were worried about what we're going to eat, what kind of food we're going to eat. Thankfully, we had, like I said, we had family in town, so we were able to expand on it. Most people couldn't. You eat beans, type of stuff. Because you can make masses for a lot of people.
Yeah, sure.
To have a steak, to have meat was a treat. First year was not that good. Now it wasn't, when we moved to another camp, it was slightly bit better. The food was made in-house. My mom was part of the group that made the food. Obviously, it was still made in very large quantities for 3,000 or 4,000 people.
Yeah, still limited ingredients. I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. But it was there. It was guaranteed. We knew that you were going to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. It wasn't anything special or anything like that. It was very simple foods. But the problem is with nutrition, if you don't have adequate nutrition, then now your immune system can't fight off certain things. So that was the worry of people who knew that nutrition is necessary. For kids didn't care. We would just eat a loaf of bread and just keep going. Pre-war, we grew up with a bunch of vegetables, and meat was always represented because we would buy an animal. We were able to afford that. You buy an animal and store it in the freezer, and then you make these really whatever you want to make. Different types of chops and all that stuff. Just lamb was always, it was accessible, it was healthy, we were eating. But now you're having a lack of that. So as kids, we were just going about our little business, just still being kids, while it's really our adults that we're having.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. My parents were the ones that were looking for houses. They were trying to figure out, all right, what's the best schools? And it's not the same, right? It doesn't have the urgency. It doesn't have, ultimately, it's not a critical life decision. But at the same time, I didn't see any of that. I was just, I'm here until my parents tell me we're going somewhere else. You know what I mean? Did you have that feeling, or did you have the anticipation of, I know we're leaving and I know where we're trying? Were you involved in discussions around where you were ultimately going to go at all?
No, not at all. Zero. As children, we had zero impact in that. Our impact was listen to your parents. Basically obey. Don't be an extra burden on top of all this other crap that's happening. Don't be an extra burden. So your goal is to just keep in line and not add to the issues.
Keep a low profile, stay out of the way.
Yeah. So now that is your way of survival. Keep a low profile, stay out of the way. Now, when we were in a refugee camp, we were in not only a refugee camp, we were in a camp that was in Croatia, a country that's now has its own independence, and it's also fighting, quote unquote, your people inside the borders of Bosnia. So you can potentially be a target outside of the walls of the camp. So you had to hide I did hide your accent, because it's a Bosnian versus a Croatian. You have an accent. So you hide that a little bit. I remember us getting robbed one time. It was just me and my friends who were also from the camp. We were in the same class together also. These couple of kids stopped us and demanded money from us because they noticed we were refugees. Easy targets. You don't have any rights. You're a second-class citizen. So, easy target. So, you don't want to make yourself an easy target, low profile the whole time. And so, that's like 3 years of doing that. And so, how did I feel throughout this? Like, within the walls, it's like your people are there. There's not too much to worry. But as soon as you're outside of the walls, you're just constantly looking over your shoulder because the country is at war. That country is also in war with your own country. And sometimes people just want to take anger out of people and might be there. Might be a target, easier target than anybody else. So thankfully, we hung out in groups and I didn't experience too much of that. Probably because I kept figuring out the mode of not getting into trouble, which is keeping a low profile.
Yeah.
So I think going back to the survival mode, that could have been a big imprint in my life of, oh, you want to stay out of trouble, or you just want to get to the next level, just keep a low profile. Low risks, the lowest risk you can take so you don't end up getting whooped for no reason or just getting cornered by somebody or somebody stealing from you or because you barely had anything. Right. So not to make yourself feel like a target, you just constantly, obviously low profile, low risks. You don't make any moves that may be attention getting. So yeah. Stuff like that for 3 years straight, something like that.
So once you guys got here, did you get dropped straight into Roanoke or did you come through somewhere else?
So the way it worked out for us, we arrived to the United States August 29th, 1995. And it went from Croatia to Italy, from Italy to New York, I think LaGuardia or something like that. And then from LaGuardia, I think we flew to Charlotte, and then from Charlotte to Roanoke. I think that was the path, if I can remember correctly.
I'm guessing that was your first time on an airplane too.
That was my first time on an airplane. From Croatia to Italy, we were on a bus. So leaving from Italy, I think it was like a 9-hour flight to New York. That was the longest flight I've been on and the first time I've ever on an airplane. So you don't know where the hell you're going. That was a weird experience.
This concludes part 1 of Elvir's story. Next week, the conversation continues with his perspective as an immigrant being dropped into a new country. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found some value in looking at a situation through another's eyes. Keep practicing gratitude. Be grateful for all the good we have in this country right now, and do your best to amplify that good with grace and compassion toward others who may think differently than you do. None of us are immune to the dark side of tribalism. Look for opportunities to open your arms, or at least your ears, to others. Invite them into your world, and approach the conversation with an open mind when they invite you into theirs. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and I'll catch you next time.